At America's most sacred shrine, a lone female guard stands her silent watch. But when a violent thug decides to make her his target, he's about to learn that some warriors don't need a battlefield to end a fight. The silence at Arlington National Cemetery is a living thing. It's a presence, not an absence. It's heavy, woven from the unspoken grief of a nation and the profound respect owed to its fallen. On this crisp November morning, the air was so cold it felt sharp in the lungs, a sterile, cleansing cold that seemed to magnify the quiet. A thin, crystalline layer of frost glittered on the endless, undulating rows of white headstones, each one a stark, minimalist monument to a life given. The sun, low and pale in the vast sky, cast long, skeletal shadows across the manicured hills, and the scent of damp earth and evergreen boxwood hedges hung in the air. High above, the faint silver trail of a jetliner stitched its way across the blue, its distant rumble the only intrusion from the world beyond these hallowed gates. But here, at the tomb of the unknown soldier, the silence was at its most absolute, a sacred vacuum broken only by the rhythmic, metronomic click of heels on marble. The source of that sound was Corporal Anya, Valkyrie, Petrova. At 30, Anya moved with a precision that seemed almost supernatural, a testament to thousands of hours of relentless practice. 21 steps south. A turn, executed with the sharp, clean economy of a blade's edge. A 21-second pause, her gaze fixed, unblinking, on the hallowed marble sarcophagus. Then, a turn to the east. Another 21-second pause. A turn to the north. 21 steps. Each movement was a prayer, each click of her heel a heartbeat for the heroes who had no one left to remember their name. Her uniform was a work of art, creases so sharp they could cut glass, the deep blue fabric of her coat a stark contrast to the pale stone. Her rifle, held with a practiced ease that belied its weight, gleamed under the weak sunlight, its bayonet a sliver of polished steel, a final, deadly period to a statement of lethal intent. But it was her face that held the attention of the small, huddled crowd. Framed by blonde hair pulled back into a severe, regulation bun, her features were stark and focused, carved from granite. High cheekbones, a firm jaw, and eyes the color of a winter sky. They weren't cold, not exactly, but they held a depth that spoke of things seen and endured far from this peaceful hill. Hidden beneath the immaculate uniform was a body honed not by parade ground drills, but by the brutal, unforgiving demands of real-world conflict. The call sign, Valkyrie, wasn't a casual nickname, it had been earned in the dust and chaos of the Middle East, bestowed upon her by the men whose lives she'd pulled from the jaws of death. She was a former Air Force pararescueman, a PJ. Her motto had been, that others may live. Now, she stood watch so that the memory of those who couldn't be saved would live forever. Her mind, usually a fortress of discipline, allowed a flicker of memory. A training exercise in the Nevada desert. The blistering heat, the weight of the gear, the simulated screams of the wounded. She'd been struggling, her focus wavering. Her mentor, Master Sergeant Eva Rostova, had pulled her aside. Focus isn't about blocking the world out, Petrova, Eva had said, her voice calm amidst the manufactured chaos. It's about finding one still point inside the storm and holding on to it. Find your anchor. Now, the tomb was her anchor. This watch, this perfect, unending ritual, was for Eva. It was the only tribute she knew how to give. Among the onlookers, a young man named Liam stood slightly apart, a charcoal pencil flying across his sketchbook. An art student from Georgetown, he was working on a semester-long project titled Living Monuments, an exploration of how duty and ritual shape human identity. He'd come here expecting to draw a symbol, but he'd found a person. He tried to capture the tension in her posture, the unwavering line of her jaw, the immense weight of history that seemed to rest on her solitary shoulders. A few yards away, leaning heavily on a blackthorn cane, stood Colonel Miller. A retired Marine, his back was ramrod straight despite his 80 years. His face was a roadmap of a life lived hard, etched with the lines of command and loss. His eyes, a piercing blue that missed nothing, followed Anya's every move. He wasn't watching as a tourist. He was watching as a brother in arms. He saw the perfect execution of the manual of arms, the flawless discipline. But he also saw something deeper, something he recognized from the eyes of the young lieutenants he'd sent into battle in Fallujah. He saw the unique burden of the post-9/11 generation, the quiet fire of someone who had volunteered to face the storm and had come back changed. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod of profound approval. The air was thick with reverence, a shared, unspoken contract of respect. But a contract is only as strong as the willingness of all parties to honor it. And one party was about to default in the most flagrant way imaginable. The disruption arrived in the form of Jax, the Rhino Miller, a name he'd given himself. He wasn't related to the colonel, he was the antithesis of everything the old Marine stood for. Jax moved through the respectful crowd like a bowling ball, all swagger and brute force, his friends trailing behind him like hyenas in the wake of a predator. He was built low and wide, a slab of muscle packed onto a thick frame. A snarling pitbull tattoo writhed on his neck, its inked fangs bared. On the thick fingers of his right hand, a heavy, custom-made steel ring shaped like a skull glinted menacingly. He wasn't here for remembrance. He was here for a dare. The night before, fueled by cheap beer and his own bottomless ego, his sycophantic friends had bet him $100 he wouldn't have the guts to mess with one of the tomb guards. "They're just for show, man," one had slurred. All dolled up. Jax, a disgraced MMA fighter kicked out of the league for a brutal, illegal knee strike that had permanently injured his opponent, saw it as an easy win. Rules were for other people. Respect was a currency he didn't trade in. His voice, a gravelly boom, ripped through the quiet. "Yo, get a load of this." He jabbed a thumb toward Anya, who was in the middle of her 21-step march. His friends snickered behind him. "What's the deal? They got Ken dolls guarding this thing now." The crowd shifted, a ripple of unease passing through them. Liam looked up from his sketchbook, his brow furrowed in disapproval. Colonel Miller's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the head of his cane until his knuckles turned white. Jax, basking in the attention, sauntered closer to the low chain barrier that separated the public from the guard's path. He directed his next comment directly at Anya, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Hey, pretty doll, you lost? The mall's that way." Anya didn't flinch. Her pace remained unaltered, her gaze locked forward. 21 steps. Click. 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 Her world had compressed. The tomb. The rhythm. The memory of Eva's voice, "Find your anchor." Her silence only fueled Jax's arrogance. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue?" He leaned over the chain, his voice getting louder. "Or is it that you can't walk and talk at the same time? Is that too much for a little girl to handle?" He turned to his buddies, winking. "Guess they're letting girls play soldier now. How cute." The insult, so blatantly sexist, hung in the cold air. Liam muttered, "Unbelievable," and flipped his sketchbook closed, the artistic mood shattered. The colonel's jaw was set like granite. This wasn't just disrespect to a soldier, it was a violation of the sanctity of the place itself. "Look at that stupid walk," Jax continued, his voice rising in volume, performing for the growing number of phone cameras now pointed his way. "Like a little wind-up toy. And that rifle. You even know how to use that thing, or is it just for decoration?" Externally, Anya was a statue of military bearing. But inside, a battle was being waged. The taunts were a distraction, a deliberate attempt to break her focus. She felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the body's primal response to a threat. But she met it not with anger, but with discipline. She used the techniques Eva had drilled into her. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. She focused on a single point on the horizon, a distant obelisk. She mentally recited the names of the crew chiefs who had died with Eva on that helicopter. Rodriguez. Chen. Williams. It was a litany of sacrifice, a shield against the profane noise of the man in front of her. Compared to their loss, his words were nothing. A gnat. A buzzing annoyance. Her duty was to the tomb. Everything else was noise. Anya's utter lack of reaction was something Jax's ego couldn't process. He was a creature of loud reactions, of dominance asserted through fear. This woman, this guard, was treating him like he didn't exist, and in front of an audience, that was an unforgivable sin. It infuriated him. His face, already flushed from the cold and his own bluster, turned a deeper shade of red. "Hey! I'm talking to you," he roared, his voice cracking with frustration. He needed to force a reaction, to prove he was in control. He did the unthinkable. He took the half-empty can of energy drink from his hand and, with a flick of his wrist, tossed it underhand toward the tomb. It landed with a sickeningly loud clang on the pristine white marble, rolling a few feet before coming to a stop just shy of the sarcophagus. The sound was a desecration. It echoed across the plaza, a physical assault on the hallowed silence. A bright green and black aluminum can, a piece of cheap, modern trash, now lay upon the nation's most sacred altar. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Phones, which had been hesitantly recording, were now held up with grim purpose. This had crossed a line. A mother quickly pulled her young son behind her. A group of teenagers who had been laughing moments before now stood in stony silence. Before anyone else could react, Colonel Miller's voice cut through the air like a rifle shot. "That's enough, son." He took 2 firm steps forward, his age falling away to reveal the unshakable authority of a man who had commanded battalions. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an immense weight. "You are desecrating a memorial to men who died for your right to act like a fool. You will pick up that can, you will apologize to this soldier, and you will leave. Now." Liam, emboldened by the colonel's intervention, also stepped forward, his sketchbook now forgotten. "Dude, seriously, just stop. Have some respect." Jack spun around, his eyes wild. He was cornered, his pathetic display of dominance challenged by an old man and a college kid. Needing to reassert his alpha status in front of his friends, he lashed out at the closest target. He shoved Liam hard in the chest. "Mind your own business, art boy." Liam, caught off guard, stumbled backward, his sketchbook flying from his hands. It hit the ground with a thud, pages of charcoal drawings, of soldiers, of headstones, of Anya herself, scattering across the pavement like fallen leaves. The crowd murmured in outrage. The shove was a clear act of assault. The situation was spiraling out of control. This was the moment Jack sealed his fate. He turned back to Anya, a sneer twisting his lips. He saw her continued march not as discipline, but as weakness. He pulled the heavy skull ring from his pocket and slid it deliberately onto the middle finger of his right hand. The steel gleamed in the cold light. "All right, little soldier girl," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "You won't talk. Let's see if you can fight." With that, he stepped over the low chain barrier, planting his heavy, mud-caked boots directly on the polished black marble of the guard's mat. He stood there, arms crossed, directly in Anya's path, a mountain of ignorant muscle blocking the path of an unbreakable vow. The confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but of when. And it would happen in the next 21 steps. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing as Anya continued her inexorable march. The crowd held a collective breath, a tangible thing in the frigid air. Every eye was locked on the 2 figures, a tableau of contrasts, the chaotic, brutish anger of Jax versus the serene, focused discipline of Anya. She reached the end of her 21-step path, her polished boots stopping inches from Jax's sneakers. She paused. The regulation 21-second count began. For a fleeting moment, her winter sky eyes met his. There was no fear in them. No anger. There was only a calm, chilling assessment. It was the look of a professional evaluating a threat, a look that could freeze fire. A warning. Jax, blinded by his own rage and arrogance, didn't see it. He saw only a woman standing before him, and he interpreted her stillness as terror. A cruel, triumphant smirk spread across his face. This was his moment. He was the star of this show. "Time's up, princess," he grunted, shifting his weight to his back foot. He swung. It was a haymaker, a wild, telegraphed punch thrown with all the force his considerable bulk could muster. The steel skull ring led the way, a crude, brutal weapon designed to shatter whatever it hit. To the horrified onlookers, the blow seemed unstoppable, a blur of violence aimed directly at Anya's jaw. It was a punch meant to maim, to humiliate, to destroy. But Anya wasn't a statue. She was a pararescueman. She had been trained to move with an economy of motion that bordered on supernatural. She had fast-roped from helicopters in near-zero visibility and navigated treacherous terrain under fire. A clumsy thug in broad daylight was a problem with a simple, biomechanical solution. As the punch sliced through the air, Anya didn't retreat. She didn't block. She moved. In a single, fluid motion that seemed to defy physics, she executed a subtle, precise sidestep and pivot. Her body flowed like water, the movement originating from her hips, not her feet, keeping her center of gravity perfectly stable. Jax's fist, carrying all his momentum, missed its target by a scant inch, whistling past the space where her head had been a microsecond before. The wind from the blow stirred a loose strand of her hair. Thrown off balance by the force of his own missed swing, Jax stumbled forward, his eyes widening in confusion. His body was overextended, his guard was down, and his jaw was exposed. That brief moment of instability was all Anya needed. She didn't wind up. She didn't shout. Her counterattack was a masterpiece of kinetic efficiency. As his body moved past her, she pivoted back. Her left hand, which had been holding her rifle, remained perfectly still, the weapon a steady anchor. Her right fist, however, snapped out from her side. It wasn't a wild swing, it was a straight, piston-like strike, traveling the shortest possible distance to its target. All the power generated from the ground up, through her legs and core, was channeled through her perfectly aligned wrist and into the two largest knuckles of her hand. The sound was sickening. Not a loud smack, but a dense, wet crack. It was the sound of bone giving way under immense, focused pressure. Anya's knuckles connected perfectly with the point of Jax's jaw. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world was silent. Then, a spray of red mist erupted from Jax's mouth, and within it, glinting like scattered pearls against the white marble, were fragments of his teeth. His eyes rolled back in his head. His body, which had been a monument to arrogant strength, went completely limp. He collapsed like a sack of wet cement, hitting the marble with a heavy, undignified thud. He landed in a heap, his hands flying to his ruined mouth as a gurgling, inhuman sound of pure agony escaped his throat. The coppery scent of fresh blood hit the cold air. Blood bubbled between his fingers, staining the pristine ground. As he lay there, twitching, the full, shocking reality of his miscalculation crashed down on him. The world became a blur of horrified faces, a cacophony of gasps, and a searing, white-hot pain that consumed his entire being. The heavy skull ring, its purpose so brutally negated, slipped from his finger and rolled away, coming to a stop with a final, pathetic clink. The Rhino had been felled. Not by a roar, but by a whisper of violence, executed with terrifying perfection. The silence that followed the crack of bone was even more profound than the one that had preceded it. It lasted for 3 long seconds as the crowd processed the sheer, shocking efficiency of what they had just witnessed. Then, the dam broke. A single, stunned, whoa, from someone in the back was followed by a wave of explosive cheers and applause. It was a raw, cathartic release of tension and outrage, a spontaneous ovation for the restoration of order. Anya Petrova, however, seemed oblivious. With the same dispassionate grace she had displayed all morning, she took one step back, her right fist returning to its proper place at her side. She pivoted, her face an unreadable mask of discipline, and resumed her march as if nothing had happened. 21 steps. Click. 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 The only evidence of the violent interruption was a single, glistening bead of sweat that traced a path down her temple and the almost imperceptible tremor in the fingers of her right hand, which she quickly stilled. Her anchor had held. 2 Arlington security guards, radios crackling, pushed through the now cheering crowd. One knelt beside the moaning heap that was Jack's, his professional demeanor barely concealing his astonishment. "Sir, stay on the ground," he ordered, though Jax was incapable of doing anything else. The other guard picked up the skull ring between a thumb and forefinger, shaking his head in disgust. "You're in a world of trouble, pal." Liam, his hands shaking slightly, lowered his phone. He had recorded everything. The taunts, the shove, the throw of the can, and the final, brutal climax. "I'm posting this," he said to his friends, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. "And not for clicks. People need to see this. They need to understand what this place means, and what happens when you defile it." His friends, who had been frozen in shock, nodded in agreement, one of them already helping him gather the scattered pages of his sketchbook. As the guards cuffed Jax, hauling him to his feet, his bravado was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated pain and humiliation. He staggered, spitting blood and tooth fragments onto his shirt. The crowd parted for him, some jeering, others just staring in silent awe at the female guard who continued her solitary, unbroken rhythm. As they led him away, his head bowed in shame, his last glimpse was of Anya's ramrod straight back, a living symbol of the dignity he had tried and failed to shatter. The contrast was devastating. He had come seeking a moment of cheap glory, he left with a lifetime of disgrace and a dental bill that would haunt him for years. The cheers slowly subsided, replaced by a buzzing murmur of disbelief and admiration. "Did you see that?" a woman whispered. "One punch." A veteran wearing a faded Desert Storm cap nodded slowly, a grimly satisfied smile on his face. "That, right there, is a warrior." The story was already beginning to form, the legend of the tomb guard who didn't need a weapon to defend her post. As the security guards disappeared with their groaning charge, a sense of normalcy, or at least a new version of it, began to settle over the plaza. The sacred silence returned, now imbued with a fresh layer of awe. The discarded energy drink can was quietly removed by a groundskeeper, erasing the last physical scar of the encounter. Colonel Miller, who had watched the entire exchange without moving a muscle, finally stirred. He walked slowly, deliberately, to the edge of the chain barrier. He stood there for a moment, his posture straightening as if on parade. He adjusted the collar of his coat, then, facing the tomb, and by extension, Anya, he raised his hand to his brow and delivered a slow, formal, perfect military salute. It was the highest sign of respect one warrior could give another. Anya, at the far end of her march, saw the gesture. She couldn't return it, but for a fraction of a second, her unwavering gaze met the colonel's, and a silent understanding passed between them. It was an acknowledgement of a shared code, a code that Jax and his kind could never comprehend. Within hours, Liam's video was no longer just a video, it was a global phenomenon. It exploded across every social media platform, racking up millions of views. The title he'd chosen was simple and direct: Thug disrespects tomb of the unknown soldier and learns a hard lesson. The comment sections were a wildfire of opinion, a digital town square debating what they had seen. That guard is a national treasure. Absolute hero. He got exactly what he deserved. You don't mess with the tomb. Forget the punch, look at her discipline. She never broke stride. Hua. As a woman, this is everything. He targeted her because she was female and got completely owned. Iconic. That's what happens when toxic masculinity meets a true warrior. #Valkyrie. The name stuck. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, the world knew about the Valkyrie Guard. While her official identity was protected by the military, Her background as a decorated Air Force PJ was leaked by former colleagues proud of her actions, adding another layer of heroism to the narrative. She became a symbol of female strength, of military honor, and of the quiet, unyielding power of respect. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Anya's shift came to an end. The ceremonial changing of the guard was flawless, a perfect bookend to a day of imperfection. As she was relieved, she stepped off the mat, her duty done for the day. Walking toward the guardhouse, the weight of the day finally settling on her shoulders, she passed Colonel Miller, who had waited. "Corporal," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You did your duty today. And then some." "Just doing my job, sir," Anya replied, her voice low, tired. The old Marine offered a rare, small smile. "No, son. You reminded everyone what that job actually means." Alone, walking toward the parking lot, the stoic mask finally fell away. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. She reached into a small pocket of her uniform and pulled out a single, worn dog tag on a beaded chain. The name etched into it was Rostova, E. She closed her fist around the cool metal, its familiar edges a comfort in her palm. This was why she was here. Not for glory, not for fights. For Eva. For the unknowns. For the promise she'd made to honor their sacrifice with her own unwavering discipline. She knew her mentor would have approved of the control, if not the necessity of the action. Anya's one punch defended the honor of the fallen, but her true strength, the strength of all who serve, comes from a deep, abiding respect. A respect that some people have to learn the hard way. Share this story, not for the drama, but for the powerful message it holds. In the comments below, let us know what you think, and comment respect to show your gratitude for all the silent guardians who stand the watch. And if you believe that honor and courage deserve to be celebrated, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this are a reminder of the best of us.